Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming, and I thank Google for hosting this Tech Talk today, and for Christine Hong for sponsoring me to be with you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I also want to recognize that I have with me 4 of my summer interns that are in various tracks with their educational pursuits. A couple have completed their first year in law school, and a couple are undergraduate communication majors. So it's been really fun to enjoy good food here today and have a great tour. I think I have 4 interns who are considering career changes after spending a few hours on the Google campus. It looks kind of like being at Disneyland. Anyway, I am Jennifer Lahl, and I am here today representing the Center for Bioethics and Culture. I'm the national director and founder of that organization. I also am a founding director of a very interesting coalition of a diverse group of people from both sides of the political aisle and religious divides. And we organized almost 3 years ago now for an international campaign called Hands Off Our Ovaries, which we thought was a way to get people's attention. I don't deceive myself in any way to think that all of you here today are going to agree with me, and I'm expecting to have some interesting conversations and questions at the end of my talk. I've been asked to repeat your questions for the sake of the recording, and I'll tell you right up front, I'm horrible at that, even though I have in the back of my mind, repeat the question. So if I don't think of it, please feel free to make your way to the microphone, and then the gentleman in the back will be very happy that he was able to capture your question and then my subsequent response. Anyway, I want to start by telling you a story. Hardly a week goes by that I don't get approached by some woman, family member, mother, sister, daughter, to tell me about their own personal story. And part of the story is that the sad reality is many of the stories I could tell you today have to be told anonymously, because so many women, families, children are wrapped up in the complexity of this issue. And I have been privileged to hear their stories, oftentimes told in utter confidence, because they are trying to piece back their life and the lives of others who have been impacted. But for the sake of my brief story right now, I'm going to call the woman Debbie. And it's not uncommon for me to speak publicly as I am today and then have women come up afterwards to tell me their story. And I was speaking to a large group of people, giving a more broader, generic sort of Center for Bioethics and Culture talk, where I briefly touched upon the issues and the concerns that I and my colleagues have around the recruitment and exploitation of young women for their eggs. And Debbie came forward to tell me her story, that she had been asked to be an egg donor, that she had considered what she thought were the risks to doing that, and was told that what she was going to do was a very safe procedure. I could tell that her hearing me speak that day was new information to her, as in I had never heard this before. She went on to talk about getting it. You hear a lot of girls talk about, I got it. And Debbie said she got it, and she got it really bad. And her doctor told her she had it so bad she had to be hospitalized. She actually put it on a scale of 10 being the worst getting it to 1 not being bad at all. She said, my doctor said I had a 9 out of 10. She went on to tell me then, after being hospitalized, she went on to donate her eggs. And less than a year later, she was diagnosed with aggressive cervical cancer, had to undergo a total hysterectomy, and would never be able to have her own children. So it's because of these types of stories and these women that we meet that I stand before you today, and oftentimes I get out of bed every day to raise awareness that young women are being exploited for their eggs. I know that one of the sayings around Google is do no evil. This is a cartoon that says how important are ethics in today's society. And of course, ethics are very important. And ethics is a discipline that primarily concerns itself with not what can be done, but what should be done. Yes, we can screw our partners and we can conduct ourselves unethically, but should we do that? And the same thing with the matter of egg donation. Yes, women can donate their eggs. They are donating their eggs. But the question that I want to concern myself with and the work that I do is, should women be doing this? And if you Google, I just love being able to be at Google saying that, because whenever I give this talk, I say to people, this is why we have Google. So when you hear people talk, you can go home and find out if they told you the truth. And if you Google egg donation, you will come up with thousands and thousands of hits under egg donation. But in fact, that's quite euphemistic language, because there's nothing about donation predominantly. Yes, there are people who altruistically donate their eggs, but by and large sums of money are trading hands. And this is a young woman who I've traveled with, spoken on several platforms with. This is Julia Derrick. Julia Derrick's written a book with a provocative title called The Confessions of a Serial Egg Donor. Julia Derrick donated her eggs 12 times. 14 if you count 2 cycles that had to be aborted because she was so sick that they could not finish the cycles in donation. Julia found herself, typical American story I hear. She was a student from Sweden, arrived in Washington, D.C., did not have a green card, and did not know how she was going to make ends meet. She answered an ad in a paper and went on to become what she would call the serial egg donor. Julia writes in her book that she became an egg donor because you can make lots of money. Then she realized that that wasn't the preferred answer that good girls state. So then when she would go back to do it again, she would say, because I want to help people. And that she learned quickly. But Julia's been quite candid. If you take the money incentive out of the equation, young girls are not going to want to be doing egg donation. How did I come to be at Google today speaking about egg donation? This is a relatively new practice. So for the interest of time, I will start with 1978 with the very famous baby who made the news, and her name was Louise Brown. Has anybody in this room heard of Louise Brown? So if, some of you have heard. Louise Brown is famous because she's the first test tube baby. And this month, July 25th, I believe, marks the 30th anniversary of her birth. So in 1978, something significantly happened, science, technology, medicine-wise, in that we were able for the first time ever to take an egg out of a woman's body, sperm out of a man's body, mix them together in a petri dish, in a test tube, in the lab, implant it back up into Mrs. Brown's womb, and Louise Brown was born. I think there was some 200 plus attempts before Louise was born. Not on Mrs. Brown attempts on her, but just in general in the practice of fertility medicine. And this is a picture of Louise on the right, who made the news, I think, a year ago now, and she's become a mom herself. So this is Louise all grown up with her baby. And Louise did not have infertility like her mother and had her baby the old-fashioned way. Mrs. Brown did not use an egg donor. It was Mrs. Brown's egg. But quickly 5 years later, journaled in the an article in Journal magazine was published with the first baby born through egg donation. So quickly, again, the technology was becoming much more efficient, and we were now able to offer people the ability to make babies by using egg donation. Dr. Alan Trounson was the fertility doctor. He and his colleagues actually published this article in Nature. At the time, Dr. Trounson was head of fertility medicine at Monash University down in Australia. What's interesting is now Dr. Trounson is here in California, and he's the president of the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, which is at the heart of the debates with Prop 71 and the whole cloning and embryo stem cell debate. It's not unusual to see doctors who sort of cut their teeth in fertility medicine make the transition to cloning research because of their skills and abilities and techniques in making embryos in the laboratory. Also, Samuel Wood, who's the CEO of Stemogen, which is a company down in, I want to say La Jolla, San Diego area, also a fertility doctor who's now involved in human cloning. And January 17th, 2008, Samuel Wood is quoted as saying at Stemogen that they had become the first in the world to create and meticulously document a cloned human embryo using somatic cell nuclear transfer using donated eggs. A conflict of interest is a concern of ours at the heart of the fertility industry and the cloning researchers who are now competing for the human egg. No reproductive revolution would not be complete without a clash in just worldviews. from the late 70s into the 80s, we see the left and the right, the religious, the irreligious, the non-religious, the debates playing out. People saying, are we playing God now that we can make life in the lab? Is this a Frankenstein moment? Do we have to worry about who and what we're creating? Are we going to create people or monsters? And just sort of that whole debate. Again, the debate over women's rights, reproductive rights, and the issue of choice. Do we have the right to reproduce? Do we have the right to bear children? If we have the right, do we have the right to demand our health care covers that? In the United Kingdom, curiously enough, the socialized medicine structure in the United Kingdom is supposed to pay for 3 rounds of infertility for couples that have been diagnosed with infertility. Because of the long waits and the long lines, infertility is not life-threatening. Most people are not waiting and adopting into this new egg sharing program, which means if you will donate your eggs to the cloning researcher, you can get a cut rate, you can get 50% discount on your fertility medicine if you're willing to share your eggs. So that's something that causes, my colleagues and I to be a little bit confused and concerned, since this is supposed to be provided in their healthcare plan anyway. Do we have the right to design our children? Now that we can make life in the lab, can I just create life because I want a boy, I want a girl, I don't want Down syndrome? So you see, what you're seeing now is the traditional lines of left, right, religious, non-religious are muddying because we have the ability to form coalition. And abortion politics, which traditionally sort of set which side of the aisle you had to be on, are you for or against abortion, doesn't really hold any bearing on these larger issues, when you could find people that would agree that a woman has a right to terminate her pregnancy, but they're going to be very uneasy about a woman terminating her pregnancy because it's a boy and she wants a girl, or it's a blue-eyed child and she wanted a brown-eyed child. And of course, as the technology exploded, my background is in pediatric nursing. I worked for 20 years in healthcare. We've stopped looking at why are people experiencing infertility in higher rates, because we found this way around it. The technology got more efficient. When you didn't get pregnant the first or the second month of trying, you were immediately sent sort of off to see the fertility doctor, when in the olden days they'd say, well, just keep trying, and keep trying a lot, and people were having a lot more maybe fun sex back then. I don't know. Can I say that? But as the market exploded and the technology got more and more efficient, the demand for the human egg became more increased, and we saw it reaching into the international market. Global art, not as in fine art, but assisted reproductive technology. This is from their website. Global Art USA, a part of a long-established international egg donor program that provides IVF physicians and their patients with high-quality donor eggs at exceptional prices. Since 2002, Global Art USA has offered an attractive alternative to the typical domestic egg donor programs through our unique international donor program. Global Art USA is an expansion of a very successful Eastern European IVF egg donor program founded in 1995. So quickly, the commercialization of the human egg and businesses setting up camp in predominantly poor countries. I had the honor of speaking at the European Parliament in Brussels to members of the European Parliament not soon after quite a few women were seriously, seriously harmed. I think it's very interesting that the members of the European Parliament took their cue from the United Nations trafficking laws. So the laws that guide and enforce the anti-human trafficking issues, they took their cue from the UN trafficking protocol and issued a resolution specifically condemning the trade in human eggs. The international laws are much more broadly written so that you can traffic in organs, not just in persons. You can traffic in blood, in cells, in body parts, if you will. The resolution was titled the European Parliament Resolution on the Trade in Human Egg Cells. It was a direct response to the exploitation of Eastern European young women and condemned the trade in human egg cells. And it stated that the harvesting of egg cells poses a high medical risk to the life and health of the women. And despite the possibility of serious effects on women's life and health, the high price paid for egg cells incites and encourages donation given the relative poverty of the donors. I read an Israeli woman's PhD dissertation. She was doing her study because Israeli has gotten in partnership with Global Art USA. So she did her dissertation and went up and interviewed and took a lot of photos, and her whole dissertation is on what's going on in Croatia, Slovakia, Romania. And young women, who were 6 months behind on their rent, who wanted to have a matching bedroom set like the Americans have, are being encouraged to donate their eggs. And of course, in the middle of a highly unregulated industry and market are all kinds of ethical breaches, conflicts of interest, abuses to young women, and corruption began almost immediately as the rising commercial value on eggs was realized. Back home here, UC Irvine, if any of you have followed what's been going on down there, I'm pretty sure that they've lost their fertility clinic altogether. Dr. Ash, who ran the UC Irvine clinics, has fled to Mexico City and is practicing down there, knowing that if he steps foot back in the United States, that he will probably be arrested. In 1995, there was a major fraud case at UC Irvine where women's eggs were being taken from them, and other people were being given the women's eggs and being told that they were their eggs. I think there's even been reports that Dr. Ash was happy to allow his sperm to be used. One of the women I met one time when I was speaking came up to me and said, "Oh, all my sister's babies are UCI babies, and every time we get together for family dinners, we all can't help but think that the middle child looks just like Dr. Ash." Can you imagine being the child that's sort of being I don't know that the child knows these stories, but that vibe that you sort of get when you're at those family functions. It reminds me of the old traditional adoption days, kids kind of growing up going, "I just don't fit in." They look at the family pictures and they kind of go, "How come I look like this and everybody else looks like that?" But the greatest injury, most recently, $23.5 million in damages have been paid out, I think in the last year. Finally, the fraud case was settled. The greatest injury, and thus the greatest payouts, resulted after one woman's eggs were taken without her consent, then given to another woman who ultimately gave birth to the child. There had to be, obviously, a lot of court cases around that. Who owns the child? I mean, if your eggs are stolen and somebody else has a child, and it was very messy. Israeli senior infertility specialists were caught intentionally, super aggressively hyperstimulating young women so that they could get so many eggs that they could go out and sell them. Normally a woman obviously ovulates 1, maybe 2 naturally a month, but I'll get into the drugs in a little bit. So they were intentionally giving these young women more drugs than were necessarily because they wanted more eggs to sell. And then also another scandal down in Orange County, California, was Options National Fertility Registry. And last year they ran a paper, an article in the paper, saying that thousands of human eggs may be missing. Options National Fertility was already forced out of business in 2003, again at a major scandal. The way that Options was set up is that young girls could pick and choose who they wanted their eggs to go to. One egg donor went for her post-egg retrieval checkup, and the OBGYN said, "I have some good news, both of the couples are pregnant." And she said, "What do you mean, both of the couples? I gave my eggs to, John and Debbie." And so with that story sort of busted loose this whole scandal. And then later on they went on to say that thousands of human eggs are missing. It was quite hilarious and sad at the same time, because the paper literally ran columns and columns and columns of numbers telling the public, if this is you, come find us, because we don't track this. So we couldn't call you up and say, "Oh, we think your eggs have been stolen or misappropriated or whatever," because we don't know who's doing all this. Of course, there's always going to be the social aspects of this story. This is Wendy Kramer, her son Ryan, on Oprah a few months back. One of my favorite children's books, Are You My Mother? These children are coming of age and wanting to know. They go to their doctor, and their doctor says, "Well, did your maternal grandmother die of? Did your grandfather have this? What's your medical history?" They don't know because they're a product of sperm and egg donation. Ryan, her son, was made through sperm donation, and Wendy is a strong advocate for no longer allowing anonymous sperm and egg donation. So Ryan grew up knowing that his dad was a sperm donor, and he wanted to find him. So she set up DonorSiblingRegistry.com. in hopes of helping Ryan find his biological father. They have still not found him. He's found many of his half-siblings. And Wendy tells me that she has on her site now matched at least 20, 40, 60, and sometimes as many as 100 children back to one sperm donation father. So you can see just the complexities of these issues. She said it's very hard to track kids wanting to find their egg donor mother. And there's so many more children, she says, that don't know they're a product of egg donation. Because as women, we can have the embryo implanted into us. We can be pregnant. We can, labor and give birth. We have all the pictures of us when we're pregnant, giving birth. And a lot of the children are growing up not knowing that they were created by an egg donation. Often it's more hard to, it's easier to know that you were a sperm donation baby. Also, a person I've chatted with and actually written a review of her book, Deborah Spar, who's a professor of business at Harvard Business School, wrote The Baby Business, How Money, Science, and Politics Drive the Commerce of Conception. The big idea of her book is this is a $1 billion plus a year industry, and let's treat it like an industry and a business and let the market forces sort of drive what's going on. And I would say to you, is that the best way when we're looking at protecting all the interested parties to just let the market sort of set how we conduct ourselves? And I mentioned earlier the competition for the human egg exploded more so when we entered the clone age. 1996, the technologies had advanced to the point where we were able to clone higher mammals with the Dolly the sheep cloning story. A few years later, embryonic stem cells were actually identified. See, before we were able to make embryos in the lab, most of the research that was being done on either aborted fetuses or fetus, like stillbirth babies. So now the research could actually be involved in embryos. And then in 2005, we had the horrible South Korean scandal break. Recently in Nature, just last week, Kevin Agan and Douglas Melton from Harvard University's Stem Cell Institute claimed that the lack of available human eggs is hindering the progress of stem cell research in the United States. They explain that the researchers are facing difficulties in obtaining human eggs for cloning, primarily because states aren't allowed to pay for eggs. Fertility industry can pay for eggs. Cloning researchers and scientific researchers cannot pay for eggs, and that is hindering their ability to get access. The South Korean cloning work was done with 2,061 human eggs that came from 129 women. It's about 16 eggs per woman. 20% of the women got it. I talked about it earlier, ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So 20% of the women got sick. 12% of them had to be treated in the hospital. 242 eggs were needed to create one stem cell line. So if we estimate 10 eggs from every donor, we need about 85 to 170 million eggs from women. And remember, these are women in the prime of their reproductive years. They don't want my eggs, I'm too old. They don't want young girls' eggs, they're prepubescent, they're not mature yet. So they are specifically needing eggs from women who need to be protected because their eggs should be for their own fertility. Dr. Robert Nachtigal, who's a fertility doctor in San Francisco, has said one of them being an egg donor, is going to die one day. Gerald Shatton, who is the U.S. partner from the University of Pennsylvania with the Korean studies, has said if California moves super fast in stimulating thousands of women, when the first woman dies, he doesn't say if, he says when the first woman dies, for the sake of cells in a plastic dish, this is going to be a nightmare. So we've seen the deconstruction of the female body. On the left is a Nature article on the cloning. What now? Below is mining the secrets of the egg. You'll notice the woman has no head. She has no arms. She has no legs. She has ample breasts. Aren't we glad for that, women? And her reproductive tract is lit up like precious gems as they mine the secrets of the egg. To the right is a graphic that was in the paper when UC Irvine announced the launch of its therapeutic cloning program. And I always ask people what's missing from this picture is the woman. We have the nice guy there in his boxer shorts. But if you look at the side graphics as they move around, it's the egg, it's the egg, it's the egg, it's the egg. But there's no mention of the anonymous and faceless woman who's needed to produce the egg. One woman in New York, I don't know if this is a joke, but she's trademarked her own eggs. She's packaged them as caviar, the world's most expensive luxury consumable item. This is one of those Google moments where I can say, if you don't believe me, go home and Google Chrissy Caviar. She has a little 1-minute clip, too, of showing her, or a woman getting onto the exam table to have her eggs harvested. So at the height of this competition of the human egg between the IVF industry and the cloning research progressing, and nobody seemed to be noticing or mentioning the fact that young women are going to be needed by the millions to produce their eggs, groups organize. Our Bodies Ourselves, which has been around since the long time, out of Boston Women's Health Collective, got very involved in this issue. A group called FinRage, which is Feminist International Network for Resistance Against Reproductive and Genetic Engineer, founded by Renata Klein, got very outspoken and partnered with Women's Forum in Australia, because Australia has a large therapeutic cloning project, which is where, again, Dr. Alan Trounson came from. Hands Off Our Ovaries was founded. Korean Women Link got very active and hosted a very large international conference after the cloning scandal down there, and one of my colleagues from Hands Off Our Ovaries was invited to speak at their event. Comment on Reproductive Ethics, which is out of the United Kingdom, and again, the Center for Bioethics and Culture. So what actually happens to make a young woman produce 20, 40, 60 eggs at a time? The first thing is she takes about 2 weeks of very powerful artificial hormones to suppress her ovaries, to make her ovaries think that she's a menopausal woman, to stop the ovarian function. And for about 2 weeks, she injects herself daily with synthetic hormones. Typically, commonly used is a drug called Lupron, which is used off-label, meaning it's not FDA approved for this. Its FDA approval comes for prostate cancer. So it's a drug used off-label for ovarian suppression, and it's also category X, which means you do not take this drug if you may or could be possibly pregnant, because you will have a child born with defects. So of course that's a concern right there, because who's taking this is young girls in the prime of their maybe sexually active years as well. One woman, Lynn Milliken, who's in the Boston area, maintains a site called the Lupron Victims Hub. And she's a woman who's been really made quite sick from years of taking Lupron because she was infertile and suffered from endometriosis. So she has a very detailed site there. She also has given Senate testimony, which is on the Hands Off Our Ovaries site as well as her site. So after the ovaries have been tricked into thinking they are the ovaries of a very old menopausal woman, the young girl is switched over to a different drug, again, injected daily for about 2 weeks. You'll see drugs like Pergonal as an example of that drug. And the purpose of the next phase of the drug therapy is to hyperstimulate the ovaries so that they don't produce 1 or 2 eggs as they naturally would, but they would produce 10, 20, 30, 60. Egg donors often tell me that Julia Derrick, for example, her egg broker loved her because she was easy to stimulate, meaning she responded well and they could get lots of eggs. They're told, you've done well, you're a good producer. Kind of sounds like, farm animals, good job, Bessie, a lot of eggs. And then they get a final HCG injection, which causes the follicles, those 20, 40, 60, whatever they produce, to finally mature. So then they can undergo the surgical procedure where they go in and remove the eggs. So you can imagine, just telling you what people do. And we live in an era where, we're all about holistic and natural and, environmentally friendly. I was just loving that you have the garden out there, and I asked Christine, what's the garden for? And she said, it's for the chef, so we can get, good food, and we're the 150, the restaurant called 150, where you only eat things that are grown. But here we are taking these young women, they're taking synthetic hormones that aren't even FDA approved. They're doing it at home, giving their injections. And then what are the risks? I told you it commonly is ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which can lead to organ failure. It can lead to strokes, cancers, future fertility problems, and even death in some cases. You can go into the Google chats and you can listen in on their conversations. How big is your belly today? Can you get your pants on today? And this is what they're chatting back and forth, because the ovaries have been abnormally, hyper-stimulated, so their bellies get huge, and they get all this edematous fluid retention, and the fluid has nowhere to go, so it starts leaking out. And you can just imagine what happens as it puts pressure on your lungs, on your kidneys, and the harm. And these girls aren't patients. They're not being monitored as if there's somebody sick in a hospital. They're young women out there who get their medications in the mail. Gilda Radner, most people don't realize, was an infertile woman who later went on to die of ovarian cancer. Liz Tilberis, who was a good friend of Princess Diana, she publicly blamed her fertility drugs that she took for her ovarian cancer, which later took her life. Author, journalist Iris Chang committed suicide in 2004 at the age of 36. She was entered into a deep depression and became bipolar after taking these drugs to address her infertility. You hear stories after stories after stories. And here is one woman, Jacqueline Rushton. I've testified with her mother, Angela Hickey, at a congressional briefing on Capitol Hill. She was 32 years old when she died of aggressive ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Her lungs went into acute respiratory distress. She was on a ventilator and had to be taken off life support. Jessica Wing, her mother is now one of my colleagues, was a Stanford student who answered an ad and donated her eggs. Jessica's mother, Dr. Jennifer Snyder, is a medical doctor as well as a PhD. She's testified twice with me now on Capitol Hill. And Dr. Schneider writes about Jessica, since her death, I kept thinking about a possible connection between her daughter's cancer and her egg donations. High doses of hormones are used to stimulate the ovaries of infertile women trying to get pregnant, as well as women who provide their eggs to assist infertile women. 1 year ago, Dr. Schneider read a 1998 article in the British journal Human Reproduction, citing a woman who donated her eggs and then died of colon cancer. The story inspired Dr. Schneider to actively pursue her theory. Dr. Schneider has since published one, if not two, journal articles now on a case review on her daughter's case. And Jessica was diagnosed at 29 of advanced stage colon cancer and died at the age of 31. When Dr. Schneider found out about her daughter's illness and death, she went back to the egg broker to try to get the medical records, and the broker said, well, we don't keep those records for very long, and they've already been destroyed. And this is Calla Papademus, who's quite famous around this neck of the woods because she also was a Stanford student. She answered an ad in the papers offering her $50,000. And probably within 3 days of taking Lupron, she suffered a massive brain stroke and will, ironically, for the rest of her life, have to take daily hormone replacement therapies because the stroke obliterated her pituitary gland, which normally regulates and secretes those drugs. And she will never be able to have children on her own. And Calla's story accentuates the whole bait and switch. Calla answered an ad offering her $50,000. She was told after reviewing her profile that she hadn't been selected, and could we please keep your profile on file in case somebody else comes down the road. And a period of time passed, I don't remember how long, and she was picked and selected for a $15,000 client who's going to pay her $15,000. When she was in the hospital, literally paralyzed on half of her body for several weeks post-stroke, her egg broker called her and said, you didn't fulfill your end of the contract. You didn't produce the eggs. We're sending you a drop cycle check of $750. And she nowhere appears in the medical literature. But this is my good news, bad news slide, and I'm almost ready to take your questions. The good news is after 30 years since Louise Brown was born, changes and trends are moving away from what I call the reproductive medicine gone wild approach. And they're moving back toward things called, what you'll see commonly if you typed in search words, natural cycle IVF, minimal stimulation IVF, mild approaches IVF. Less is better. no longer this aggressive, hyper-stimulating, super-ovulating. I was in April in London and attended this conference, Welcome to ISMAR, and ISMAR is the International Society for Mild Approaches to Assisted Reproduction, where I heard day after day of international experts talking about the drugs are dangerous, the procedures are harmful, the benefits and the outcomes to the children produced this way are not optimal. We need to move away from that. But again, the concern is, what about the non-patient egg donor who has set herself up to be the commodity? Suzanne Parisian, who's the former medical director of the FDA, says the girls who donate their eggs, after they are done with her, there's no numbers. There's nobody saying how many of those girls went on later to have complications or problems. She is nameless. She doesn't appear in the medical literature. There's no tracking. There's no government oversight. She is gone. Nobody cares what happens to her. So this is what we hand out on college campuses, thinking about donating your eggs. Think again. Thank you. Questions? Comments? Wow. All right. So do I just say class dismissed then? Oh, wait.
Okay, so I'll ask one, and I'll say, is this on? Are you okay? There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
So we actually did, my partner and I had reproductive issues, so we had one baby successfully through IVF, and after repeated other tries, actually used an egg donor. So I'll state that up front. But are you saying that all egg donation is bad? Or I know that the donor that we used went through the exact same, with the same doctor, through the same protocol that we did, and was coasted and so on and so on. So we thought was minimal risk. Are you saying that's all bad, or there are
I'm saying what
ways to do it?
Jennifer Schneider said, and makes a point. Young girls are told there's no known risk, which is a lot different than saying there's no risk. I mean, we don't know. We're not tracking. Your egg donor, it sounds like, had a delightfully wonderful, unhospitalized, uneventful egg donation procedure. We don't know what the long-term risk for her is, do we? Because we don't track. If you donate your kidney today to help a stranger or a family member who needs a kidney transplant, you today are making an informed decision based on years of tracking. Because when we first started going to people and saying, will you donate a kidney, we think people can go on and live long, healthy lives with one kidney. We didn't know, but we think. But you immediately back then, in the olden days, went into a tracking system, a database, so that we could continually monitor people who donate kidneys and what happens to them, short, long, longer term. So we today are the beneficiaries of that long body of data collection, so that we can go to people. We haven't done that. We've been doing egg donation since, the early 1980s. We don't track these girls. So did Gilda Radner die of ovarian cancer because she was an infertile woman and took these drugs? We don't know. So I'm not standing up here saying your egg donor is going to die of ovarian cancer. But I am saying we know, I'm 50. The minute I had a hot flash, I go, okay, do I take hormone replacement therapy? Do I take estrogen? I mean, the literature has been very convoluted. No, you don't. Yes, you do. And in my mother's era, you had a hot flash, you went on estrogen. I mean, that's just what we did. We're living generations of the women who went before us that were told to take DES. One of those dreadful drugs that then went on to produce a virulent form of ovarian cancer, and the daughters born of those, daughters of DES. So shouldn't we know before we go to these young women and say, we need your eggs? So that they can then say, yes, I will take the risk. I will assume that risk because I want you to be able to have a baby. Or
I'm totally supportive, by the way, of getting the data to make those decisions. But it sounded like you're saying stop all egg donation, not let's put some bounds around how it's done and what data is tracked afterward.
Well, when you have the international community saying we need to move back to minimal stimulation, natural cycle IVF. Louise Brown's mother wasn't hyperstimulated. It was a natural cycle where they watched her cycle and knew when she was going to ovulate and went in and retrieved the egg follicle after it had naturally matured in her body. But because of efficiency and because of speed and because of quality controls, we found, well, if we can get 30 eggs, isn't that better? Because IVF is expensive. And then we have more eggs to play around with because it's all product driven. I mean, the end game is that happy couples have happy, healthy children. But you see the experts in fertility medicine saying, wait a minute, after 30 years, we are given pause. And we need to move off of this approach. And remember, the egg donor isn't a patient. She's not sick. She's not going to assume the risk of taking these drugs and undergoing the surgical procedure as she kind of weighs the calculus of risk to benefit. So I'm saying natural cycle, minimal stimulation. I'm saying we don't know. And we need to be quite candid with young women before we ask them to do this.
I just have a question about the one of the slides you showed had a picture of an advertisement, $100,000 for egg donation. I'm just curious. I guess it's just my own ignorance. Why is that different than organ donation? If I were to offer someone a kidney today, my understanding is that would be illegal to sell it.
Right.
Why is and I also know that in medical research and drug research, the actual payment of money, in some cases, if it's larger than a certain minimal amount thought just to compensate the person for the time, is often considered to be, in a lot of areas of medical ethics, coercive. And I guess I'm curious as to what is the difference between an egg donation and, let's say, a kidney donation or a blood donation that allows for this attachment of a large lump sum?
Well, a kidney donation is a donation. You can't sell your kidneys. In the United States. I mean, we have laws that say you can't sell your kidney. I think somebody tried to sell their kidneys on eBay or something. But the law is that you cannot sell your organs. I made the point about the international community because the international laws are written broadly enough that eggs, organs, blood, are encompassed in things that you can't traffic and sell on the black market. Now, you raised a question about the use of human subjects in scientific and research practices. And I think the guidelines are pretty tight when you look at documents like the Helsinki Declaration and the Nuremberg trial, and not the Nuremberg trial, the Nuremberg Code of Medical Ethics. When you enter in as a subject in a research study, you have at any moment the ability to get out of it and say, I don't want to participate in the study anymore. There has to be some risk to benefit calculus. What is the benefit to the egg donor? I mean, when you're entering into a research as a research subject, perhaps you're entering into that and you're weighing those things. But I don't see what the benefit as the young egg donor, and she's not treated like a subject in a human clinical trial or something, which are really tightly guided by internal review boards, and like I said, the Declaration of Helsinki, where they need to make sure that you're not harmed. And if you are harmed, then there's going to be some compensation or some protection for you. I mean, Calla Papademos, she got a phone call saying we're going to send you $750. She says every year when I go for my annual MRI and see the big hole in my brain, I'm reminded about what happened to me. There's nobody that's responsible for her long-term medical needs or her compensation. Did you want to come to the mic? And I think maybe this should be the last question because there's people coming in the back.
So you touched on there should be, the same way you donate a kidney, there should be studies and follow-ups and the same types of rights. Are there programs like that? Is there a push towards making that
No, that's why I've spent the last 12 months doing 3 different congressional briefings. I mean, at a minimum, we are asking to develop a federal tracking system. I joke, the ad that I showed about the $100,000, that was at the Daily California newspaper where my daughter just graduated from, and she brought it home to me. But I joke that these young girls could literally travel the world and sell their eggs whenever they run out of money. There's guidelines The American Society of Reproductive Medicine's guidelines say you cannot do this more than 6. Well, I, as a scientific person, say, well, how come 6? Has 6 been shown to be safe, but 7 isn't? Has 5 been shown to be, kind of borderline? And, why 6? Let's study it and say, yeah, 6 times is safe. You can do this 6 times. Because I know Julia Derrick, who's done it 14 times, and she got very sick, and she was able to lie and sort of, get under the radar and just hop to a different clinic and find a new egg broker, because guidelines mean, it's kind of like today's, suggested donation. That means you can give, or you can not give, or you can ignore, or you can, give, $1 million. So the guidelines are meaningless. And at the tenet, the kind of the hallmark of our medical ethics is this thing called informed consent. And how can we properly and adequately inform these young girls so that they can agree and consent to do this if we haven't done our side of the homework and created a body of evidence that says this is safe. It's safe 6 times but not 7, or 4 times or not at all. Or these kinds of girls are going to be more at risk than these kinds of girls. I mean, some of us could smoke our whole life and never get lung cancer. And some of us could smoke a year and get lung cancer. I mean, we have the talent and the ability to track and collect data and make some meaningful decisions about that information. And these young girls literally are, we take their eggs and we're done with them. And I mean, your situation is a rarity where you had a relationship and you knew this person, but even then, I couldn't say to her, long term, you're going to be fine. We don't know. Thank you for your time. It's been my pleasure to be with you today.